Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church Weekly Podcast. Conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you with us on this Wednesday afternoon or whenever you are listening to this podcast. You know, the point of this podcast is just to do a little bit of a reflection back on this past weekend. It was kind of right here in the middle of Hump Day, I guess it is. And so we'll look back on this past weekend as well as looking forward to this coming weekend. In this particular case, looking forward and even into Christmas as well. And I would need to say I was a bit surprised from this past weekend. Hadn't really gone, when I put together the original plan for this series, wasn't really planning on going to this direction of heaven and angels. And so was surprised in God's direction going that way, but I was also surprised by the reaction that came as a result of that. And I probably got more reaction. I mean, it's only midweek now, but I probably had more reaction from this message than at least any one that I've shared, in recent weeks, months, and even all of this year. And one very interesting thing I thought about that was, I've been thinking about the fact that it seems like when things are going really, really well, that we oftentimes don't think about heaven or the supernatural. It almost seems like we're so much tied up kind of in the way things are right now that we don't necessarily think about it. And so Mark is with me, and one of the things I was thinking about that was that it seems that way when it comes to music. So when you look at church history, you see those very difficult times, whether it's World War I, World War II, whether that's back from the Civil War and even back throughout history, that there seemed to be more songs that would emerge during that time about heaven and all that God has for us. I don't know. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, I know there was a lot. I know even my parents say there was a lot of songs about heaven, hymns and stuff that they liked. And I was like, well, we're living on earth, But there's really something about that. And if you even look back at the Negro spirituals, a lot of them were written when they were slaves and they were out in the field thinking, man, sometime God's going to take me out of this and rescue me from slavery. And so there's different songs written for different seasons. And I was even looking back, when I first got around singing contemporary music, little choruses and stuff that we sang when I was a teenager. That was a few years ago. Even the singing songs like "We Are One in the Spirit." That was during that time of there was a lot of people demonstrating against the Vietnam War and just a lot of turmoil in our culture back then. Yeah. And God started the whole culture was this free love and stuff. But then God started doing something about that. Hey, we need to love each other and we need to become one. So that songs come out of what's happening around us, And I even saw that in the renewal back in the 90s when the Toronto blessing happened. You start hearing all these songs about we need to know His true love and things that now we look back, it seems very mushy, but it's great to bring that kind of stuff in with songs on the kingdom of God and stuff. We kind of need a blend of different things,
Yeah, when you mentioned that song, "We Are One in the Spirit," and about the division of the 60s and so forth, we should probably maybe be singing that song again.
Yeah, I thought of that, actually.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it is interesting to think about, that God meets us right where we are. So we're in a circumstance, and God meets us there. So whether we address the issues of our culture, even in music, or the message that is there, but God meets us right in that place and we respond to it. And I've thought even, knowing old hymns and so forth that speak of heaven and kind of direct our attention there, I've noticed the vacancy of that somewhat in recent music. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that even this past weekend, having a message on heaven and angels, that it seemed to connect with people in a very specific way. And even like the two of those things, when it came to heaven and angels, I think people were more fascinated by the topic of the angels, but they were almost, I'm trying to think of the right word, they were ministered to, or somehow the part of the message on heaven, they really seemed to connect with.
Well, I think a lot of times our culture, like you said, we think of heaven as, well, that's after I die. I don't think about it now.
Yeah.
We don't think about the rewards of heaven there. And even angels, growing up depends on what your culture is. Angels were like fluffy things.
Somewhat imaginary.
Yeah, right. It's more fairy tale stuff, you
Yeah.
know. And we didn't, at least I didn't grow up with the idea of them being around us,
Right.
and be walking with us and protecting us and going before us
Yeah.
and things like that. So I think it was very refreshing to hear those two things together.
Yeah, and the whole thing about bringing it up during the Christmas season is just for that reason. It seems kind of fairy tale-ish. And so if we mix Santa Claus and Rudolph and Frosty and all that little drummer boy stuff, which is, I'm fine with all of that. Well, not completely fine, but but if we mix it all together, it becomes part of this fantasy that we really can't connect with. And that's what we need to say, okay, this is real. Like, there are heavens, they were singing on the hillside, they sang to the shepherds, and some of the stuff is kind of make-believe that was added. But it kind of gets clumped into all the same stuff, and we need to be careful about separating out the reality of what God has for us.
So you're saying you're not going to dress up like Santa Claus and preach next week?
No.
No, okay.
But you mentioned the whole thing about heaven being a reward, and that was actually one of the verses just even for this topic. Talking it today is it's interesting for me in the front to be in the platform and be sharing a message and being able to observe the congregation and what's connecting with them. And one of the things that connected on Sunday, this past weekend, I should say, not necessarily Sunday, was the whole idea of reward. And what I mentioned in that is that we're going to have an opportunity of just somehow both being fully known as well as fully knowing. And in that process, we're going to know the results of all of the works that we have done. I mean, oftentimes now we don't see the response to it, or maybe we hear, hey, 10 people got saved as a result of some outreach, but we don't know of our personal part in that. And even here at Effort Community Church, when I have given reports on, I think the number is right around 700 people have been born again in the past 3 years. And so that is not my reward. That's our reward as a congregation. And I'm not quite sure how that plays out, and I can trust God with that. But it's a place where we actually see the results. And Psalm 73, David, if you can read about David's authenticity as he writes that psalm, he really spends most of the psalm, it's kind of depressing psalm, saying, is it really worth it to serve God? And he even begins like, I was jealous of the arrogant. Like, I wish I could live a life like them. And they don't really care, and they do whatever at once. And it seems like God just seems to accommodate their, rebellion or whatever. And so he was losing his perspective until the end of the psalm. And then I went to the house of the Lord, and then it all made sense. Like, he got a godly perspective on that. And I would just simply encourage all of us, man, just don't become weary in well-doing. Just continue to do and trust God. I know that you don't always see the results of that. You don't see the fruit of that. One of Mark's favorite activities is mowing lawn. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to bring something else up. That's good.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Why is that? Why is
That's
that?
because I can see him getting something done. So I can see it, and it looks nice when I'm done. So I like
exactly.
that.
See, there's something very unique about being a pastor and being like, you do what you do out of obedience before the Lord, but we don't get immediate results of the work that we do. And so it may be years. I mean, we see fruit, and we're glad for all of that, but it's just different. And so usually pastors have some sort of a hobby or something that they like to do in which you see an immediate result. I did this, and now I can see what I did. Because so much of what we do, you don't see the result of that right away. That's like that way for all of us. We want to be faithful before the Lord, but then we think, I don't see the results of that. And so we can be like David in Psalm 73, where we almost begin to give up. And man, we just absolutely cannot give up. And even just the opportunity of going to people. And this past Sunday, or this past weekend, I would have talked a little bit about a couple. And I don't remember ever having a conversation with them about the Lord specifically. But yet as they conducted themselves, both in the way they treated people as the way they treated each other, I could tell that what they were living was authentic. And that was most important to me. And so even when I wrestled through some things about, is this whole thing about God really true? Is it worthwhile following him? and all the theological issues that can be around it, I could look at that couple and say that was real. And so then I've never had a chance to actually tell them that. And the day will come when I will have a chance to tell them that.
Yeah, talking about the rewards of heaven, and I know the whole theme of heaven and angels and stuff. I guess I got thinking, why did it trigger something inside of me? But it could have been, I had a sister that passed away this year. Of course, Glenn Weaver and
Yep.
Mark Martin and others that I know, probably more this year than most years. So heaven is a little more real when I think about who all's there waiting for me to get there.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Yeah, and I also think about in Hebrews it says that we're surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses, and so I wonder what there is from that perspective that they see of what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that we fully know, but we have a significant topic to jump into, in the future as well. And the other thing from this past weekend that I think I wanted to highlight today was that heaven is a right place, and it's a place where things get made right. And Psalm 25 says that God is just. And it was interesting, we're made in the image of God. And so one of the things about who we are is that we love justice. Mm-hmm. And there's something that's just inherent in us that when something is wrong or there's an offense, that we really want to see justice done. And one of the greatest arguments for the existence of God is that inside of us, mm-hmm. that desire for justice, because we have to admit that it's beyond ourselves. And so we've all had some things that we just felt like, man, that is just not right. Now, we understand accidents happen. We understand things don't always go right. And that's life. But then there's some things that have happened to each of us and all of you as well that we think, man, that is just wrong. That is wrong. And there's been times in my life where maybe my faith level was up here and something happened and it just kind of plummeted. Like when you go through a season like that, you begin to question everything about God. Mm-hmm. Like, is God real? Do prayers actually make a difference? Or just simply just give up and live life, live and let live kind of thing. And you need to rebuild from that. So you kind of go into a slide and then you kind of begin to rebuild your faith. But that can happen like multiple times through life. It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
So even though like we come to a place of peace where we say, okay, I don't get that, but I trust God with it, we still look for justice. We still look for, like, I want to know, like, how is that actually made right? I'm sure you've had some mm-hmm. times like that.
Yeah. And I think of that with some of the death this year. It's like, why? What are the fruit? What fruit are we going to see from that? What
right.
payback do we get from that? And I'm looking for that.
Yeah.
Don't know what it is, but yeah, I agree with you that we want justice, and I think it's right that we want justice.
Yep.
And, we're not here to get even, but we want justice. We want God's will to be done in the situation, even in those situations we don't understand.
Yeah. And I would want you to know that if you're carrying something like that in your heart, it's not an offense before the Lord to carry that. Like you go to your grave or you stand before God and you got some questions about why things worked out a certain way. I truly don't believe God's offended by that. I don't know that you need to kind of push that aside and ignore that. I do think you can trust God with that circumstance and with what happened and the future of all of that. But you'll know, like I think we get to that place and we're going to be, it's going to be a place of fully knowing. And I wonder what that's going to be like. I mean, I think, we all have those moments where the lights go on mm-hmm. and we think, oh my goodness, I never saw it that way. I can just imagine, can you imagine lights going on over your entire life and every point of injustice and every point of hurt? Now all that makes sense and God just brings it all together. Like it's going to be hard to imagine that moment, but I'm confident that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, as we look ahead to this coming weekend, I would have mentioned this past weekend that we're going to be sharing together in the Lord's Supper. I want to remind you that if you are watching from online this weekend, to be prepared to do Lord's Supper at home. And so just look forward to that. I'm really looking forward to that. It's been a while since we've taken the Lord's Supper as a congregation, just simply because of COVID. This Sunday's message may sound more like Easter than Christmas, but it's what Jesus got for us. So if that's what he paid the price for and gave us as a gift, then we want to recognize that gift this coming weekend. And then just briefly, I want to mention to you, just remind you of our upcoming services. on the 20th of December in the afternoon, 3 o'clock. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah, I hope so. And I'll look on the website. Yeah, we don't know what's going on. But that'll be our service of remembrance. That will be Sunday afternoon. Really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a significant time of ministry as we get through this year. And then our Christmas Eve services, which are the 23rd and 24th. On the 23rd, it's 5 and 7. The 7 o'clock one will be live streamed, and then it'll be on demand since after that. And then on Christmas Eve, December 24th, it'll be 3, 5, and 7. We will have cookies. Now, we're going to have to serve them differently. You just can't walk around with tables this year, but it's going to be a little bit different. But we know that you can't do without cookies. So I think they're baking like 10,000 cookies, something like that.
It's a lot.
Yeah. And one thing we'll share with you this coming weekend as we head into our Christmas Eve services, we are going to ask you to register for which service you're coming to. And so if you're bringing 5 guests, it's your family and 5 guests, and that'll all become clear. You just let us know that you're coming and the 5 guests. It's just simply a way of being responsible in the current season that we are in and not just packing the building out on one specific service, but kind of spreading things out over all 5 of those. We got plenty of room. It's just a matter of having the room at the right time. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll be sharing more with you this weekend about that. So thanks, Mark, for sharing with us today and being part of the podcast. And thanks to you folks for tuning in, whether you're live right now or you're tuning in the podcast a little bit later on. And we'll look forward to seeing you this coming weekend.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting EphphatACommunityChurch.com.